supports this bill through the House, Mr Speaker. How could we not support a bill that is aimed at offering better protection to animals around this country? We had a number of cases of terrible cruelty to animals. The government stepped in, took action. It's brought in a bill that effectively doubles the penalties for any ill treatment to animals, willful ill treatment or neglect, or, as the Minister said, failure to meet the physical and health needs of an animal, Mr Speaker. And Labor supports the protection that is needed for animals. No questions, no ifs, no buts, no maybes. We have to offer that protection, Mr Speaker. Of course, when the bill first came in, the bill had doubled the penalties, but of course had not put in place any additional resources for the policing of that around the country. I acknowledge that the latest budget shifts within MAF some more money into animal welfare policing, Mr Speaker, and I might come back to that later on, because there clearly has been an additional effort within MAF to carry that out. But the question that I have, Mr Speaker, is in acknowledging the need for this. Over 14,000 complaints in 2008 and only 58 convictions for animal welfare issues, Mr Speaker. Clearly a big gap, need for resources, need for a tidy up in the law, and we've moved in that direction. It is absolutely unacceptable, to quote the Minister, that we should have offending against animals, Mr Speaker. The question I asked, and in using the words offending or failure to meet the physical and health needs of an animal, to quote the Minister, will not be tolerated in our society, Mr Speaker. That's why Labor supports it. Well, the question I have to the National Government, what about the people? What about the people that you've forgotten? Because in coming into this House today, and the Minister's already gone, and celebrating the passage of this piece of legislation that will rightfully protect animals up and down this country, what is the National Party doing to protect, to quote, the physical and health needs of people in this country? Well, I'll tell you what they're doing, Mr Speaker. They are neglecting that. Mr Calder should listen carefully, because maybe he doesn't meet these people. On the streets of Westport yesterday, I met a woman who could not walk without the aid of 2 walking sticks, who is currently embroiled in a battle with ACC, has been told that her application for an accident, medical misadventure, accepted at the time, but now under review, in tears talking to me, she is fearful for her future, because Nick Smith and the National Party, in their determination to firstly discredit ACC, then to say that we have to cut back in areas, issuing policy instructions saying go back and review these cases. We have in this country at the moment individuals, people, who are fearful for their future, whose protection and physical and health needs are not being met by current legislation. Well, the question I have in passing this good piece of animal welfare legislation, what's the National Party doing about people? They're all silent. Not a murmur, Mr Speaker, because they know in celebrating this protection for animals, they are neglecting the health and physical needs of thousands and thousands of people in this country today. And animals too, but they're making progress in animals. We acknowledge that. That's why the Labor Party supports progress and supports this legislation. But bring back to the House a piece of legislation that guarantees the health and welfare of individual New Zealanders. That's what we want to see in this House, Mr Speaker, and the National Party ignore that. In fact, it's worse than that, because in reviewing thousands of ACC cases, of putting fear into the hearts and minds of thousands of New Zealanders for their future, they don't know where they'll get an income. Many of these people are unable to work, and the ACC case managers are saying, well, we're going to look at this again. You may not be entitled to any cover for accidents that were acknowledged as occurring at work, were work-related, should be covered by the scheme. But to those people I say, Mr Speaker, don't go and blame ACC, blame the National Party, because it is their policy to discredit ACC, firstly say that it's broke and failing. We now know that's not the case. They too took a hit like every other investment fund around the world and lost money because of the international recession. Well, they're now back on the way up. ACC is not broke, but in an attempt to discredit ACC, the Minister is issuing policy instructions to review cases and, wherever possible, throw people off the support system that they rely on. It is their only support system, Mr Speaker, and to quote the Minister for Animal Welfare, failure to meet the physical and health needs of an animal, well, what about the humans, Mr Speaker? Will not be tolerated in our society. Abuse of animals, rightfully tidied up in this piece of legislation, will not be tolerated in society. And if you're caught doing it, you'll be penalised, and we've put more resources in place to identify where abuse is taking place. Well, Mr Speaker, any one of those ministers could come and ask me, and I will identify where abuse is taking place against individual New Zealanders. Come and ask me. I'm writing to the Minister on a frequent basis, Mr Speaker, to seek support and intervention to stop the physical abuse, the failure to meet the health and well-being needs of individual New Zealanders, Mr Speaker. I cannot help but make that point when this animal welfare legislation comes to the House, because it is hypocrisy, Mr Speaker. It is absolute hypocrisy to cheer the passage of animal welfare legislation that protects animals at the same time that we are heading backwards in the care and protection of New Zealanders, of children, of people on ACC, Mr Speaker, of elderly. That's why we have an inquiry, in conjunction with the Green Party, to investigate the growing abuse and lack of care and the neglect that is occurring up and down this country of elderly people, Mr Speaker. If Mr Carter is to be believed, if he seriously does believe his own words, that failure to meet the physical and health needs of an animal will not be tolerated in our society, Mr Speaker, well, what about people? What about individual New Zealanders? They are absolutely silent. Mr Speaker, if I said that 100 times in this House, I won't make any apology. I won't make any apology, because that is why I have come to this Parliament. That is why I've come to this Parliament, to protect New Zealanders, Mr Speaker, when they need it. I stand in this House, Mr Speaker, as the first Speaker for the Labour Party on the animal welfare legislation, because I've come to this House to support any government that brings in legislation to protect animals in this country, and we are doing that. Every one of us in the Labour Party, we're supporting this legislation because we've rightfully said that it does improve protection for animals in New Zealand. Oh, Miss Goodhue, she can't even look after the ethical behaviour of one of her finest citizens. I suggest she goes back to Timaru and defends Mr Hubbard, because we know what's going on down there. Mr Speaker, he's just one. He is just one, thankfully well-resourced, one individual who's being abused in this country, Mr Speaker. Well, what about all the other silent individuals, Mr Speaker, the children, the people on ACC, the people on benefits and the elderly, who don't have enough people standing up in this House and defending their rights to fair protection, to prevention of cruelty, to prevention of willful ill neglect, Mr Speaker. Because the definitions, as pointed out in the bill about neglect, Mr Speaker, about willful neglect, apply to humans just as much as they apply to animals, Mr Speaker. So each and every one of the members, especially of the Primary Production Select Committee, we did improve the bill, we did a lot of good work, there was goodwill to try and get good legislation, and I think we have. But maybe Ms Gowdy should go to the Social Welfare Select Committee, Mr Speaker, and do the same for individual New Zealanders. That's what I say, Mr Speaker. That's what I say, because that's what I'm in this